As you know, this is part 2 of Apple's story on this channel. So let's go back to the last episode and retrace the steps to this video's leader, Tim Cook. But to understand the story, we first gotta go back a bit further in time. Also, one more thing, I will be talking mainly about Tim Cook, but will emphasize on other things in Apple since, it's not a Tim Cook biography video, it's an Apple history video, right? Anyway, let's get started. So to continue where we started off in the last video, we gotta go back a bit further to understand. In the late 90s. Around this time, Apple was pretty shaky, and it had only been an year since Steve Jobs took the role as CEO after being rehired due to some financial crisis in Apple. So saying they weren't bankrupt at the time wasn't even much of an option. And one of the main problems they had at Apple was the shipments and suppliers, since they didn't really have anyone good filling in that role. So Steve Jobs went looking, and he found Tim Cook. At the time, Tim Cook worked for Compaq, which was a pretty stable company, unlike Apple. But the thing was that the day Tim Cook went to that interview with Jobs, his perspective changed, and even with everyone contradicting him, he joined the same year. Around the same time, other major key players joined Apple, such as Jonathan Ive, who was the head designer at Apple, and Phil Schiller, who often came in the keynotes. A few years passed, and Apple had been picking up. They created the iMac within the next 5 months of Tim Cook's hire. They created the iPods, the iBook, and many more. But then Steve Jobs and the other executives wanted to change to flash drive memory instead of disk memory. But they had a problem. They didn't have many suppliers. So Tim Cook took in charge and struck long contracts with dozens of suppliers, saying they were required to buy millions of their flash drives no matter what. But in return, the companies and suppliers would only focus on Apple. And though this was very risky, it worked. And this is very overlooked. It was something that was too overlooked. But this was what gave Apple the inch they needed against other opponents in the game and to fend off against them, since this would help them in many more products, such as the MacBooks and the iPhones, and even the iPads. And seeing this, Jobs decided to make Tim Cook the COO, which means the Chief Operating Officer, which is practically the right-hand man of the CEO himself. And it was pretty good timing, since around the same time, Jobs began to develop pancreatic cancer in the liver, and this led to multiple layoffs from his side, but the one in 2011 ended up being his last. And this made the only choice of the next CEO be Tim Cook. By now, Tim Cook had already been the interim CEO for 2 times, so it wasn't really a question who was going to be the next CEO, but more of the transition away from people like Steve Jobs, since Cook was more of a soft-spoken executor who gets the operation done. And Steve Jobs was a charismatic innovator. And this made even Cook doubt himself. Though it was gonna get way worse, since at the time Apple had just spread into wider markets filled with new competitors as well as older ones. But Cook found a way. Around 2012, problems started to arise in Apple since executives began to boil into arguments, tough arguments, and tension rised in the company's main leaders. This threatened the very cooperation of the company, so Cook made some very questionable and controversial changes. Firstly, he fired Scott Forstall, which was highly controversial. But the reason was since he was very argumentative in attitude and had made faulty Apple maps. So Cook forced him to step down his position and make an apology letter, but he refused. So he loses his job. And quite same happened to John Browett, who was fired due to changing the work hours and decreasing hires, which just made tension between the workers and employees. Then the executive decided to share their responsibilities that they had lost by firing them amongst themselves. And though that might have been a bit bad, it ended up being a benefit in the future since the future iPhones ended up being so much more advanced as they did this. And one of the main reasons was as the John Browett role of main software design was given to Jonathan Ive. And Jonathan Ive handled it perfectly. He practically made the software look just as sleek and modern at its time as its hardware. And everything went really smoothly. With the developing market that thrived for larger and better phones and the big changes that happened in Apple itself, the iPhone 5 finally changed its size from 4 inches to 4.5. And sure, it's not a lot, but this allowed for a whole new row of apps, and that was pretty big at the time. And they continued the same streak with the iPhone 6 by making it 5.5 inches, an inch bigger, all while keeping the MacBooks and iPads developing in the background, making more modern by the day. Though there was one more problem. The Tim Cook thing was still controversial since he hadn't really innovated anything new to Apple. But in 2015, Apple revealed its Apple Watch, which is considered one of the best smartwatches till date. And then in 2016, they launched the first AirPods, which were the best wireless iPods till now. So also a success. And even the HomePod was also a success. And this all made Apple what it truly was, a perfectionist company. But one of the major problems that Tim Cook saw was privacy. So Apple began to severely focus on the privacy aspect of things. This throughout his whole CEO timeline, he's been improving their ethically obtained raw materials, and they have even been investing in renewable sources of energy. And all of these extra things from Tim Cook really make Apple a bit iconic. In the end, I think one of the things that Apple and Tim Cook and even Steve Jobs, for that matter, is that it's filled with perfectionists from the inside. Whether it be the charismatic Steve Jobs or the soft-spoken Tim Cook, they have the one desire to make their products not only the first, but also the best in the market. something best for their loyal viewers in a day-to-day service. And with that attitude only, that in 2020 their company became worth $2 trillion, and now they are the most valuable company with 2. Anyway, that's it for today's video. See ya. Bye.